Ruthie was one of those who came and joined us early on when we moved into this building and was never frightened by moving from her village in England to this place, and has accomplished great things. And she truly does have the call to the city, and God has done miraculous things through her, so I can't wait till you hear her stories because they're amazing.
Well, yeah, my journey started about 18 years ago when I walked through those doors as a DTS student. I know I don't look that old, right guys? But 18 years ago, I walked through those doors. I come from a village. I can't agree with Laurie. I was actually terrified. I came to San Francisco because God had clearly called me, and I don't have time to explain all of that today, but I walked through the doors and I thought to myself, I've made the biggest mistake of my life. I was staying in one of the rooms upstairs. This was my first time to America. So I had come from a small, beautiful, quaint little village in England with cows and cobbled streets. And I walked into the Tenderloin and I was like, oh, okay, this is America, all right. And everyone was like, oh, no, it's not all like this. So I realize now that there are many different faces to America. And so I came here and I thought, gosh, I've made the biggest mistake of my life. Like, number one, no one understands me because my accent was super thick. Number two, I didn't understand them because their accent was really different to me. And also, we were doing a lot of work with people who were on drugs or had been drinking. And I couldn't understand. I remember feeling like, what am I doing here? Like, we can't communicate, even though we speak the same language. And you know, it's so funny. Faith is often like that, right? You take a step of faith, and then when you throw yourself off the cliff, you think, oh my gosh, what have I done? But then you're just free-falling. And I'm so glad that I came. I'm so glad that I got to come and join this ministry. I feel so privileged. You know, it's funny, Laurie and I, we didn't really know what each other were going to talk about. But what I wanted to say was when I came into this ministry, what I saw were women who were leading. I saw that women, they were crazy. Like, there's so many stories that Laurie could share that I kind of grew up, and my whole adult life, I've been working here, that I heard and I thought, these women are crazy and I want to be crazy like them. And what happened was this space, like she said, it kind of became this launching pad for my life personally, for the ministry that I've gone on to develop and birth, but for hundreds of students and staff and interns that have come in here and stepped into an atmosphere where we talk about the impossible like it's possible. Like, we talk about, you're a young woman who's 18 from a village, here, go lead this. And I was like, really? You trust me with that? Sure. And so that's kind of what this building and this ministry represents for me. You know, over the years, I've changed a lot. I have had many different hairstyles. One of them was very short and cropped in pink. I'm really glad we don't have any photos of those. So I've changed over the years. I got married, I've had kids. But you know what? San Francisco has changed me. And some people might say, oh, well, that doesn't sound good. To me, it's a gift. I feel changed by the city in the best of ways. I feel like the people that I have met here, their stories, their lives have impacted me. They've experienced things I will never experience. I've learned from their life. It has been a gift to interact with all the people that have come through this ministry, all the people that we've met and we've done ministry alongside. I was remembering a few of the stories and people that I've met. I was thinking about all of the students that have come through here. I used to staff our DTS for almost a decade and work with a lot of students and have sent some of those students that were trained here to Vietnam, to China, to Thailand, all around the world to be long-term missionaries. And they started here in this building. I think about the woman that I met at a YWAM conference who was a YWAMer. This is many years back. And she told me about her life being caught up in the sex industry on this block of Ellis Street. And she said, you know, it's so good to meet you because I used to stand outside on the street and I used to look up at your sign, YWAM San Francisco, and I thought, I can change my life. And she changed her life. She got out of prostitution and she became a YWAMer. And I thought, it was just a sign. I said, did you ever meet any of our staff? And she said, I don't think so, I just saw the sign. I just thought, oh my gosh, God does these crazy things. I think about the thousands and probably tens of thousands of people that we've given hot chocolate to. I think about my life as a young adult, like I was out on the street at night almost as much as I was working here during the day. I think about the women out in the Mission District who were caught up in prostitution and victims of human trafficking and who Owen gave a flower to or cookies to and prayed with. I'm thinking about the children that we've met in this neighborhood. I'm thinking about so many people that we've had the opportunity to work with. I'm thinking about the strip clubs on Broadway that some of us at BJM went in with our angel wings on at Christmas to deliver gifts, to let them know that God loves them, and the women called out, "God sent me an angel." Like these are the kind of stories that I recall. I remember as a DTS student, we would drive a van. We had it was a big van back then. And we would drive it up Polk Street, and there used to be a lot of street kids out on the street, and we would literally drive up and throw open the van doors and say, "Who wants to come for dinner?" And they'd just climb in. And then we'd drive them to the Refuge, which was a discipleship house we had, and we'd just sit around dinner. And sometimes people were detoxing, and sometimes people were high, and sometimes people were like, "Who are you people? We just got in the van, we just wanted dinner." We're like, "Okay, well here's dinner, and can we pray with you?" And like, these were like the crazy stories that were like, these were like my 20s, and it was just such a privilege to look back on that. Some of the memories are painful. I remember one of my first friends that I lost to a drug overdose, and he was 21, I was 19, and I had met with him out on the street just the night before and talked with him and had one of those real conversations where you walk away and you think, gosh, God's doing something really deep in his life. And then the next day I found out he'd OD'd alone in a hotel room. And we went to his makeshift funeral, and there was a handful of us there. And I thought, gosh, this is really hard. This is really hard. I think about the woman that I met collapsed outside of one of the strip clubs in the Tenderloin, who shared with me that she had just been raped and assaulted and was desperately, urgently needing help. All of these stories for me are mingled together, and I think one of the things that I learned, or have learned being here, is sometimes the most beautiful things happen right next to the most painful things, and God is in absolutely all of it. Jesus is present in absolutely all of it. The building next door, some of you may have had a tour, but the building right here used to be one of the most prominent sex clubs in San Francisco. When I moved in here, it still very much was. I'd see people come and go, and yet we felt like God called us to have that space too. And it's funny, isn't it, how you think you're believing God for big things, and then he's like, actually, I want you to believe me for even more. And so I remember we used to come here, and we used to literally lay our hands on this wall and pray. And say, God, we believe you've promised us that space, and we don't know how it's going to happen. And we prayed that for years and years and years. And sometimes when God calls us to things, like it's not immediate. And we want it to happen. We want to see the success. We want to see the breakthrough. And that's another thing I've learned here in San Francisco. It's usually not the quick fix. It's usually just the faithful being present. Sometimes God shows up because people have just stayed. Because they've pressed in and they've said, you know what, I'm going to be here. Even if I don't see the crazy, miraculous stuff, I'm going to stay. And then God is just so faithful. I remember when we took over that space next door and we cleaned it, and then we cleaned it again, and again, and again. And I remember the walls were painted really dark red, and it took like 7 coats of paint. But it was a privilege to be part of renovating that, because that space that used to be a sex club is now where we train missionaries. Our DTS classroom is over there. That is insanely crazy. Like, that is the redemptive heart of God, that he would take this place that's so dark and so like out there and say, you know what, where do I want to train missionaries to send to Asia and Europe and around the world? I'm going to take a sex club, and I'm going to give it to a bunch of like crazy YWAM kids who are going to scrub the walls and say, what could we do with this space? That's the kind of crazy stuff that God does here in San Francisco and at YWAM. But the funny thing is that I've seen in my life, I was asked to talk about establishing, I was reflecting on my life here and thinking about that as God has extended us and called us to be established and really to put roots down and dig deep, whether it be having new properties or getting involved in people's lives, or just like planting in new neighborhoods, whatever that kind of looked like to establish, he didn't do that without doing a work in our hearts first. And I think that's the thing about God. He never just says, hey, I want you to just go work for me. Just get this stuff done. He's always about increasing our capacity our ability to receive his love, so that when he calls us to the next thing, it's like, oh yeah, I can step into that because God's established himself in us, and then we spread out from that place. I remember one of the first things I learned here from Laurie and Pat and some of the other leaders is ministry flows out of who you are. Like the staff that you see here today, they're here because God has done something in their life. They're here because God's transformed them, and that's the beautiful thing about God. He's interested in us, and then so we can go reach the world. You know, one of the things about this being a launch pad and kind of seeing that faith in action, it kind of stirred me up to think, okay, you know, what does God want to do through my life? I felt like things were possible. And a few years ago, myself and the BJM team, we opened the YWAM, which is down the street, and it's a women and children's center. We do work in this neighborhood with women and with their families. And I remember when God said, hey, I want you to open a space. We didn't have any money. That seems to be a theme, if you haven't noticed. We didn't really have any money, and we didn't know how we were going to make it happen. But I remembered the stories I'd heard about this place, and I remembered laying hands on that wall and cleaning that place. And then I thought, you know what? If God's done it before, he can do it again. And we took over the space down the street that had no electricity, no running water, and the lady took me in and was like showing it for me to rent it. And I just thought, perfect. And I think that has been instilled in me. Look for the wreck. Look for like the most unlikely place, and that will be what God wants. And it was incredible, and it was 7 months of renovating, and I didn't know what the heck I was doing. Like, which HVAC system do you want? What's HVAC? What does that even stand for? Like, what color do you want to paint these walls? I don't know. Like, and it was this crazy journey that honestly was probably one of the hardest seasons of my life. And that's what I mean by like the most beautiful alongside the most painful. Like, I cried on my kitchen floor during months of renovation more than I probably cried at YWAM San Francisco, thinking, I don't know what I'm doing, but God said. I don't know what I'm doing, but God said, and it was like creeping forward. And now, 5 years later, we have a women and children's center, and so many people have come into that space. But that was a faith that was in me, that was given to me, that was blessed to me from the people that went before me. And just in closing, I just kind of want to say, like, that's the thing I think hopefully you're picking up on today, is we have a history with God here at YWAM San Francisco. And I think he wants us to have, each of us, to have a history with him. A history of walking with him and hearing his voice and hearing his word and stepping out in obedience and faith. I mean, that's what we build over our lives. That's what 30 years really has been about here. It's been about this history of going into like some of the darkest places, of hearing God's voice, of being faithful, of saying yes when every part of you wants to say no, and believing that God's going to show up. I think about so many people that have come through this space, that have said yes, that have kind of jumped into being part of that history. I think of Amy and Christine and Rhonda, who served as part of the leadership team here with me for 4 years, between Laurie and between Tim and Carol. And without them, without women and men like them who would say yes, like, we wouldn't be sitting here today. Like, it's beautiful to honor those of us that have been here, but there are so many people here that you don't see their faces, you don't know them, but they came and they were faithful and they served. Donors, volunteers, people that said yes. That is what has made these 30 years possible. So I really consider myself privileged to have been here and to be part of this story. I'm looking towards the future for YWAM San Francisco and thinking, God, you have more, because you don't change. So this is amazing history, and I love it, and we can celebrate it, but let's also think, gosh, like, what's he going to do next? It's only going to be better.